All right, folks, we are officially live and I'm having some tech glitches, but what else is new? That's what happens when you're streaming live from Gilroy with folks in other parts of the world with way better internet. So I'm here today with Mia Xochitl Hernández, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, galaxy, universe, stratosphere. I don't know, somebody throw some geek terminology at me. But
Yes.
thankful to have you here. I will let you talk about yourself for a quick second, and I'm gonna keep lighting the candle over here for the streaming tech gods to not kick me off of my own live stream. Háblame de ti.
Okay. Hello. I'm so glad to be with you today. My name is Mia Xochitl. I have known Rosanna, oh my gosh, maybe since 2016, and have shared amazing spaces together since. I'm a writer, a poet, an activist. I do housing justice work right now, where I actually investigate cases of housing discrimination throughout the Bay Area. And I've been seriously working on my creative side and writing, I would say for the last 2 years, I would say post-graduation from UC Santa Cruz, where I studied community studies. So organizing has always been in my heart. Community is everything. And I draw a lot from that inspiration in my writing. And I'm just so excited to be here today. Happy Mexican Mother's Day and happy belated Mother's Day to everybody.
I love it. And if I, could have my pick of a handful of folks that I think there are no accidents and the perfect people to stream with on a day where we are reflecting on what it means for the folks who give life, right? In the everyday. And your existence is life given for as much as my technology is lacking. And so you do so many things. And you recently started your own podcast. And I invited you on here today to share a little bit about your poetry. And I think we might both be frozen. And if that's not the case, you give me a little holler in a tweet and we'll see how it rolls.
I think we're back. I love it.
Yeah, I think we lost it for a second and we were just frozen like this.
Okay.
For the interweb. And so I was saying that your work is all over in a beautiful serendipitous way and also in a deeply intentional way. And I invited you on here to throw down some poetry. And since the universe is telling me that I talk too much and that it's dragging my internet, I'm gonna let you take it away with your first pick of the words here, because you were recently on this really cool event where you attended this poetry workshop and y'all wrote some pieces that were inspired by Dolly Parton, and I got to peep that event. And so if you don't mind throwing down a poem, it doesn't have to be that one yet, but I'm definitely like on your flow of flowetry and poetry. And for as much as you do some very strategic work, a lot of times folks kind of disconnect us as poets from the work we do as chingonas out there, and they're all kind of interconnected. And so I'm gonna stall here while your Wi-Fi cooperates, because our Wi-Fi's are doing a dance. They are doing a dance.
They are.
Like, there was a day for me to be sweating it when it's actually hot. Today is that day. So I told me, I said, if I pop off and I suddenly freeze, do dale and just talk.
We'll just hang out. It's fun.
So if it's looking like Mia is sending me notes over here, I think I'm frozen, then I'm gonna keep talking, and that's how we're gonna flow, because life is about flow. And we can come up with the most rock solid plans. And if there's anything life has to show us every day, it's where you got to be flexible, you got to be adaptable, and you got to have a sense of humor.
Honestly, I think the biggest lesson of pandemic life, or 2020 / going into 2021, is literally just to find humor in the everyday and in every spectrum of emotion that happens. And I feel like that's definitely why I signed up for a writing workshop that was Dolly Parton themed and seemed super, super thematic. And I was like, I love Dolly, but I'm not a Dolly super fan. I mean, now I am, but pre-writing workshop, I was like, that just sounds like fun. Like, I wanted to find a way to bring more joy into my everyday, because there's just been so much loss in community and my own personal life. And so I wanted to find a way to make space for creative time for me, but also to explore just joy in different mediums. So I did. I took part in this. It was hosted by Poetry Well, which is an organization in NYC. And they do these really cool live poetry concerts where they have Broadway actors come and perform poets' work. And they do a live reading on the spot. It's the first time they've ever read this poem by this writer. And then they'll talk to the poets and they'll be like, do you have any notes for me? What kind of emotions are you trying to invoke in this poem? And then they'll do a whole performance. So it's like part improv, part open mic. And it was really, really awesome. I wrote a piece that was inspired by Dolly Parton's song Wildflowers and the Bargain Store. So very metaphor heavy, and definitely along the same motif of that self-growth space. And yeah, I would love to share that with you all.
Yeah.
So,
you know,
okay.
I was like, okay. I heard, and they were like, this one comes from Mia Xochitl Hernández. And I was like, yes, that's why I'm here. And then they read it and I was like, that was so awesome. And then they read it, they did it like a few times right throughout. And every time it had kind of this different plot twist to it, kind of morphed, even with the same.
Totally did. It was so cool.
I'm not going to lie to you. The whole time I was like, dang, I want to hear this in Mia's voice.
Yes.
And
I have some really beautiful community members and just like supporters who said the same thing. And one of my biggest personal goals was to create more spaces, be a part of more spaces, and put myself out there creatively, because I feel like I have a way of looking at the world that brings together different people's stories that I really wanted to share. And I told myself, okay, 2020, girl, you are going to be doing all the open mics. We are going to be hitting the circuit. It's lit. And then, a whole pandemic came and just switched plans. So this is actually the first time that I will be performing my work, which is with you. And let's do it. Okay.
And so I don't freak you out by doing this abruptly. I'm going to take myself off screen and it's just going to be you up in there and you're going to be like, what happened?
Okay. All right. I did a quick change set to where my Wi-Fi is stronger.
Love it. The possibility.
This is titled Street Diner. My path to love was littered with detours, each filled with enticing savors. The sweet taste of a first kiss, that feeling of new person bliss, vacancies of distractions, bringing late night attractions, imitation intimacy with a side of liquid lies, smoky suggestions seem on the rise. Always looking to explore, but each person left me wanting more. More than a dine and dash connection that leaves me reeling in reflection. And then I stop to fill up my tank, wondering when my mind went blank, knowing I feel so drained because I've been so constrained. Each drive-through distraction taking from my own love and self-action. Pulling off the road, feeling like I just might implode. Finally taking a booth of my own, daring to feel all the love I have known. All the while searching for a map to point B, when the journey was truly back to me.
I love it. And see, there's a difference of like when you throw your own voice and cadence and the size and the pause and the just sometimes like words are this breath of life, kind of, they've got this flow to them. And I know, I've had the joy and pleasure of meeting you in your earlier stages.
Yes.
Kind of like pre-career, if you will, but I think you were doing plenty by then, right? In your days at Dianza. And to see you through your joys and struggles and hustles, and to see that it's not even an end result, but to see where you are right now in this moment with where we've been collectively and knowing where you've been individually.
Yeah.
And And to see you come into your own with your poetry and be like 2020 threw us so many plot twists, and here we are, right? Giving
Yeah.
each other with.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's I had my moment when I was actually during the poetry concert a few weeks ago when I was listening to my words, and I had this moment of I don't know, I felt all the growth that I have been through since, let's say, my time at De Anza, just like I just felt the weight of it in the most affirming way. Like I have been through all that to get to this point in my life, and I have walked through my darkest fears, and I'm still creating something that I don't know who I will be, but I know that I'm working towards something beautiful for myself and for people that I love in my community too. And I just think it's a really uncertain and scary time in a lot of ways, but I think that uncertainty brings the most opportunities for innovation and for creativity. And I think that's beautiful. That's what I try to channel anyway, because it's really easy to fall into that pain, especially, I'm struggling with my own familial grief. We lost our father in September. And so there was these two ways I could go with it. I could be like, all right, you're going to keep working. You're going to keep going through it. Just grind. Let's go. And then there's the other decision where it's like, feel your grief, move through your emotions, and honor where you are every day. And so that's what I'm trying to do in my work, my writing, my personal self. And 4th Street Diner was actually inspired by my father, because if you've been to 4th Street Bowling Alley in downtown San Jose, their diner is the best. It's a bowling alley diner, but they have the most fire calamari. I just need everyone to know that. Like, you need to go and support them so they don't close, because I love that diner. And that's 4th Street Diner.
4th Street Diner did not pay for any part of this production.
No, but they should definitely frame my poem and put it up.
Sure, right? For sure. That would be awesome. And I think there's something to be said about keeping places and spaces alive. And I think
Definitely.
that, for as much as everything that's out of our control, including sometimes our words and our poetry is a way of parking some permanence into space,
Yeah.
ripple effect, and kind of holding ourselves together is how I see my poetry. And then offering that. So when you're like, I'm going to perform, and I'm like, oh, girl, you are in ceremony. You are in ceremony right now when those
Yeah.
are flowing.
It's
And,
true. It is. It's very healing. And I think listening to other people share their work too, it connects you in a way that I feel like a lot of us have missed, especially in the last year. And a lot of my creative work looks at relationships in community, within power, within just digital spaces, and how distance can be bridged, but also how it truly feels in isolation. Um, and there's something really, really healing just sharing it as your truth and listening to someone else respond with theirs. It's really
yeah,
beautiful.
sure. And there's some element of connection and remembrance, right? Because it's like a month from now, come back to that poem and see what it's saying to you. A year from
Yeah.
now, come back to that poem and what is it saying to you?
Yeah.
And
I
sometimes,
actually,
poems, right? They
yeah,
have their own transformation alongside you.
they totally do. That's a funny story. Funny you say that, because 2 years ago I was at a poetry workshop in San Jose for National Poetry Month, and I had this line, and it was just the first line of this poem. It was like, and it was different. It was like, her path to self love was littered with delicious detours, and I was trying to think of, like, I love road trips, and I love driving in my car, and my therapy is listening to my music and just like belting in my car down. I just keep driving. Like, the other day I needed to go for a drive. I was coming back from my mom's house, turn on El Camino. I just keep going. I end up in South City. Just keep El Camino all the way down. But my point is that there's this feeling of movement that even if you feel like you're emotionally stagnant or stuck in a place, or you're frustrated, the act of being on a road trip or moving forward is very helpful for me. And it's something that my dad and we used to go on road trips or drives all the time. And so I kind of had this idea of, like, when you're on a road trip and you get all the really, really good, like, junk food snacks, but then you're hungry again. But it was
Right.
really satisfying in the moment. Like that Coca-Cola Slurpee really hit the spot, but you need some water now. And you need to sit down for a real meal and not just the hot Cheetos extra hot with the limon. Like there's all these different kind of parallels that I was finding. And that first line just stuck with me for like 2 years and became a completely different story today.
Yeah. And it's wild, right? It's like a wild, windy road trip of sorts. And I can't wait to hear the road trip poem because I feel like there's one in progress. Because everything you revived, I was like, yes, I could see myself in the car with some beef jerky. I don't ever eat beef jerky, but you bet I do when we're on a road trip,
I
right?
know. That's so true.
And I love long drives for that reason. It's they're poetic, and a lot of times those one-liners come to me in different ways while I'm driving or belting out someone else's music. I'm always saying, and you've seen my social media, I'm a ham, and I'll be like,
Yes.
you see me, and I'm blasting Jenny. You mind your business. I'm having a solo karaoke. That's what's going on right now. Might even be Dolly Parton. I'm having solo karaoke.
Yeah, I mean, it could be Celine Dion. We could go corridos. We could totally go like Ariana Grande. We could play SZA. It doesn't matter.
Put it
It's a
on shuffle.
spectrum.
Put it
And
on.
all of it. Put the whole library on shuffle for the chaos and see what happens.
Yeah. And I feel like folks who have that shuffle playlist like that, it's reflective of where you are in life because I'm looking at you and you're so multifaceted and you're working in all these different spaces where a lot of times it's like there's a perception that poets look and exist in this way, and it's like I don't know if you've had this happen yet, but I'll be known in a space for being very type A,
Yeah.
and that's how they'll see me, and then they'll figure this part out about me and it's like wait, I cannot compute, or in reverse. Now for the most part in the last few years it's kind of flipped where everybody kind of sees me, you see my background and you're like she must make stuff, she must be really artsy, and then I'll bust out some type A traits from my personality. People will be like, wait, hold on a second, are you trying something different? And I'm like, oh no,
No plot twist.
that was me before my recovery of sorts. Look at my color coded calendar, and there's something about the permission that poetry activates, I feel like. So how does that resonate with you? Do you feel like it gives you permission to just not be so, because I've seen you break stuff, the projects down and here's the strategic timeline of what we're gonna do. And then
Yeah.
it's a different flow. And yet we bring a lot of our poetic selves into that unbeknownst to a lot of people that
Yeah.
coexist and collaborate with us.
Exactly. I feel like we're or like knowing you, we're consistently slipping the other side of our personality into the opposite space. So it's like I will be in a super strategic, analytical reflection. Like we are talking data, we're talking deliverable, and I'm over here like flipping in these different creative ways of thinking about it or organizing visually the data. And then I'll be in a creative space, and I'll be like, okay, well, what if we did this strategic kind of creative project together where we group certain communities by like their stories regarding like housing displacement, and we bring awareness to that issue. And so there's just so many different ways. I feel like embracing my creative side has allowed me to become a stronger organizer because a lot of the times it's really academic, and that's not what community always looks like. It looks like you're telling your story and you have all these big feelings of anger, frustration, and love, and you're just trying to figure out what to do with these big feels. And so there's a lot of power in kind of switching the ways in which I do community organizing work, or even connecting with like my neighbors or other tenants that I work with, and just like what is it like to live where you live? Like what's your favorite park? Do you have a favorite street? Where do you shop at? How has your street changed in the last 5 years, 10 years? And yeah, I feel like I definitely, I think it's less surprising to people now because I've embraced the whole Mia of layers. So
Yep.
I'm a lot more open about the fact that like, yes, this is me and me, both sides. I think before it was very much like analytical leader, also likes doing this, but on the down low. And so now it's very much like, no, like I'm a writer. I'm also an organizer, and that looks different depending on what issues coming up in communities that I care about right now. But I lead from the heart, no matter the space, and I think that's pretty evident in my writing, and also just in a staff meeting or when I'm organizing like a spreadsheet. So I think that it's a little, some people still are super surprised because they've met me at different parts of my life. Like people who've met me now in grief, and like grief Mia is very completely different than if you were to meet me like post grad 2018 Mia versus 2014, you know? So there's always this evolution of, I mean, of us all really throughout our growth, but specifically when I'm thinking about how I show up into any sort of space, like familial, like friendship, romantic situation, academic, work, anything, is like, this is who I am. This is the flaws that I have, and they are beautiful as they are. And I'm aware. And it's okay because I see yours too. And I accept that you are also ever changing.
Right.
So that was that's my train of thought on that.
The train of thought was very poetic. It's like you were talking about yourself, and I'm like, you know, she straight up described poems and how poems transform and how they are perfect and perfectly imperfect at the same time. Yeah. And I've talked to other poets who are like, you know, either they edit their poems or they don't for various reasons. But that, as you were talking, connected me back to some insights that they offered about their poetry, even though you were talking about yourself. And so from that perspective, like I've constantly said, people are poetry if we're paying attention. And if you're not, there's still poetry, but it'll reveal itself to you in a different way.
Yeah.
And before this turns into like a major commercial for my pedagogy, and I'm like, yes, sign up for my classes because I'm telling you, it's like, you're the real life testament, not of my work, but just of why the way I approach other spaces is so important. Because if we can all get there to that poetic space within ourselves, you know, it makes for a lot less stress getting us to where we're eventually going to be anyway with our full self, our perfectly perfect selves.
It's unfortunately, it is. I mean, I think it's less rare now, but when I first started college out of high school and I went to De Anza, it wasn't the norm for educators to see somebody beyond just a student or beyond what they can produce. Mm-hmm. It's like, what else are they interested in? What do they bring the world? Who are they trying to be? This kind of lens of, it is pretty holistic. It's viewing the whole individual that is sitting in your classroom. I hate to say it was a new concept to me, but it really was in educational spaces. And so, you know, yourself and other professors that I had at De Anza allowed me to view myself that way too. And I think that it goes a lot to say just about educational spaces, how they can either stifle your multitude of layers, or they can help you accept the multitude of layers too. And I think we see that a lot, especially in COVID with digital learning and all kinds of digital divides that are happening. And that's a whole other rant. But
if you're in a space of stifledness and flow, whether you're a student or a professional, find the poets. Find the poets.
That's true.
You might not have the answers, but we're good at reflecting some stuff back about what you're trying to tell yourself.
Also, I feel like you can like you just see the flow. You're like, oh, this is a whole knot of situations or feelings or like bureaucracy, but let's move through that. Let's see what's going on inside there. And other people are like, why would I go through that horrible cave? And they're like, no, you just for the fun. What's on the other side? Like, let's do it for the cave.
Trust it.
Just trust the process. It's fine.
And hablando de process, I know I asked folks to look for 2 or 3 poems that they might want to share. And I know you're a fellow firstborn out in the world. Yeah.
Yes, I'm the eldest.
And we're really good at like talking about how we take care of community and everyone else. But poetry feels like that kind of ofrenda. But then sometimes it takes a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Selfishness comes to the front of my mind, but that's not the right word. And you know that, right? And I know that. But that's the word we've learned to associate, like to take the time to put these words on paper. There's an element of stuff that we have to work through to kind of unsocialize those life lessons and the broken life lessons, right? Like those functions, like it's selfish to make time for your poetry because it's not attached to your professional development, because this is the work you do, right? And so that could be a whole freaking 3-hour workshop healing session, círculo of sorts. But I do want to bring us back to like, okay, this is the ultimate selfless act of selfishness. And the end result is all of these ripples, right? And even when it's purely selfish, it still feels so damn magical, right?
Yeah.
And even when it feels like we're neglecting other things to put these words, poems are like, you'll have to excuse me right now, but I'm watching Young Rock, and so I've got like, you know, the whole scene in my mind, and I'm like, oh my god, poems are like wrestlers, and they will slam you if you don't pay attention to them.
It's
and I
true.
don't know if you feel that, but
I do.
That urgency.
I really do. Yeah, it's, you know, it's similar to when you hear folks say, if you don't take time to rest your body, we'll pick a day for you. It's very similar because like I always have analytics running in the background, and then I'm trying to just in my brain. And I'm sometimes so good at analyzing a situation or an individual or just like why someone did what they did that I don't stop to actually feel what the situation. Like I'm either responding to a crisis situation, or I'm responding to like, what is the next step in the timeline of the strategy? What is the next to do? And so stopping and giving myself time to actually feel those feelings is that is what writing allows me to do. Like I put it out and I handwrite things before I type it. Sometimes if I'm working during the day and I know that something needs to get out of my mind because I'm distracted and I can't focus on whatever report I'm writing, I will open a tab and just like rant and then close it and I'm good. But I cannot do anything until I get that out.
Right.
And
so
then, you know,
on the keyboard.
always.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I always have like the running note in my phone of like one-liners that I'm like, this is gonna be a poem later. Don't know when or how, but that's the start. And a lot of friends that I have who are creatives are very similar, where I've noticed they also have this very analytical approach where because that creative aspect has always been like, oh, a hobby or a fun thing you do on the side, or you know, like, oh, you're daydreaming, writing in your notebook again, and it's like, no, actually,
different way, right? It's a different way of tinkering, of problem solving, if you will, or of what. There's this whole idea about instead of a toolkit, it's a toy box, and that implies that we might not be able to fix it, but we're willing to tinker. Yeah. And sometimes those words need to disrupt, right? And the whole time you're talking, I'm thinking, damn, she just hit the nail on the head, because it's like we're constantly go, 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 do, 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 do. And you can make a poem with wordplay on that if you want to, because I got kids and they're immature. But I think the thing that I heard you say about poetry and about writing is that it's an invitation to just be. Mm-hmm. And that being is enough. And that is a whole different way of acknowledging ourselves, and, you know, of not having to be constantly aspirational or inspirational, but that act of just being. It's almost like a meditation, right?
Yeah, it definitely is for me, my meditation. And specifically, I told myself, I am the oldest of three, and I have a lot of experience in caregiver roles, especially with my father before he passed. And so after that, I told myself, I was like, there's a lot of time and emotional love and energy that normally went towards this care. And I'm trying to rethink what my life looked like moving forward without this pillar of identity of like the caregiver daughter. And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like? The family dynamics that are like so much of my heart look different too. And all of these things, have I learned to be this, or do I want to be this? That kind of working through. Writing about grief has been a huge meditation of sorts, but it's also opened the doors to so much healing that I honestly did not know that I was. It's like one thing reminds you of everything else that you haven't dealt with still. And so it's been very, very helpful to have that meditative just channeling.
Yeah. And hablando de, so that we don't keep stalling from your next poem that you might want to share with us. You have a technical poem you want to share with us?
Yeah, I do. I guess on that note, prior to the Dolly Parton workshop that I took, I actually took a writing workshop um, because that idea of selfishness I wanted to combat. I was like, it's not selfish to give space for myself to do this work, especially when I know that yes, it's meditation and healing for me, but the words and stories that I'm putting out there resonate with people that I know and love, and also could use these words. And so I took a poetry workshop with the poet Jessica Salgado, who's this really amazing Salvadorian woman from East LA. And hers was called Into the Bloom, and it was about tenderness and vulnerability. And one piece that we had to write was on just the earliest memory you have of hands and that kind of tenderness moment. Mm-hmm. So this piece is inspired by that. It is entitled Full Circle. And here we are, the circle connecting. My hands that used to wrap around your entire pinky finger are here, dressing you for your grand departure. I fumble on the buttons and I struggle with your laces. Shoes aren't needed where you're going, but you always taught me that feeling your best happened when you looked your best. And isn't that how you should feel when the angels welcome you back home? And that is Full Circle. And my dad always would tell me this story of, he's like, Mija, come here. And I'm like, what's up, Dad? Good morning. How you doing? Thank you. I'm doing great. And he's like, put your hand right here. And I put my hand up to his palm. He goes, I don't know where the time went. Your whole hand used to fit on my pinky, just the whole hand, just right here. I was like, that's really wild. That's truly wild. And I had not been around babies like that before. But now with my nephew, who's a year old, his little hand will grab mine and I'm looking at him and I'm like, oh my gosh, that kind of feeling the weight of your own mortality, like from my dad's perspective in those moments, when it's like, this is my daughter, like fully grown, a woman that is here taking care of me. And like, I helped take care of her and like raise her to become this person. And so I had this just memory that kept replaying on a loop in my brain. And my father, he had a whole week with us at home for hospice, which was a beautiful, difficult, beautiful experience. And that whole, like, I have just this memory of just like hands and tenderness and just being and just holding, and how so much was communicated with such a simple touch. And this whole kind of cycle of, my nephew had just been born last May. My dad had become a grandfather for the first time. He was so excited. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as Roman J had more learning milestones, you know, my dad was going through his fight with cancer, and this kind of circle of life being illustrated right in front of me. And so that is the beauty that I channel in Full Circle.
And it's beautiful. And I wasn't sure if you were going to talk about your daddy. I know that, you know, the times that we've had coffee in person, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, pre those super hard days, you know, you did talk a lot about your parents and about your dad, and this website that you were building that, you know, he's constantly a part of in some way, shape, or form. And yes. So to see you really embrace your whole self in that way and offer up these creative pieces of you, it feels very much like I see you coming home to yourself. Yeah. And I didn't, you know, I was like, I don't ever want to make people talk about those parts that are that dear and near, because it's challenging. Like for me, I find it much easier to write. Yes. And I can do that in solitude, and I can do that without having to stare another person in the face looking at me some kind of way while I'm still figuring myself out and feeling some kind of way. And so I appreciate that you were like, "Huevo, I'm coming all the way up in here and I'm going to be my full self with everything." And be open to talk about that, because for whatever reason that compels you to do that is your own, and at the same time there's this inevitable ripple effect of folks who can sigh along with that, and feeling the pieces that resonate and feeling themselves being mirrored back in a different way. And there is tenderness in those poetic hands coming through there. So thank you for sharing that particular poem. It's going to hit me a few times, and I'm not going to cry right now, pero sí quiero. And I'll cry later. But I prefer to cry in solitude, so I will.
Yeah.
In solitude.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think there's a lot of fear in that I have had in the past of honest, just showing up in my own authenticity, and sometimes that's more I vulnerable than I'd like it to be. And
yeah.
I mean, this last year has brought so many punches to everybody. It's kind of like, how are you really? No, we're all going through something in our own way. So I just feel like if more of us are able to accept that authenticity, then we can be a part of changing that kind of collective culture of having to put on that on face, that I'm okay, the hat's on. Like, we can still show up as who we are in spaces, just with different levels depending on the day. And that's something that I've had to forgive myself for, because I'm so used to being like on the go, operating. I'm on it. I'm facilitating this. Let's do that. What's the next project? And to take a moment to be like, hey, you're gonna pause and like take a back seat. You're gonna work through this, and you're gonna show up each day, whatever that looks like.
Right.
And if you show up with like less to share that day, then you do. But you're there, you're present, and there's something powerful about just being able to forgive myself and that kind of changing expectation.
Yeah. Definitely. And I know that your coffee and cheese mess was kind of this slow brewed coffee that you were getting ready to serve up, and I've seen it now with my own two eyeballs, and I'll link it into the comments in a bit. But it's there, right? And it's launched and it's in existence, and you're sharing quite a bit on there. And if you want to talk a little bit about that,
yeah,
to hear it.
I mentioned at the start that the organizing and creativity has always been a part of just my life growing up. My dad was a musician, but also Brown Beret, and he was always starting some kind of political movement in either Riverside or in San Jose, and he was always trying to figure out, what do we need, what resources can we get, who can we connect with. And on the flip side of that, my mother's been an educator for over 40 years, and so she's always keeping up to date with what is the legislation affecting access, what are the resources that we need. And so I always kind of grew up seeing two people who I just love and respected and adored, always vocal about, hey, that's not right. That's not cool. We deserve to be able to have basic needs met, and we should take care of one another. So this kind of feeling would show up in conversations at the dinner table all the time. Like, cafecitos, like you have your coffee Saturday mornings, long talk, my dad playing his guitar. How was your week, mija? What's going on at school? Oh, I got a call from my comadre, and she was telling me XYZ is happening in Riverside. Do you know anybody who does that kind of work? And just this really easy free flow of, hey, how's your friend doing? Or how's your friend doing on his website or his project? And so this kind of like acknowledgement of realizing that we are spinning this whole web together, and which pieces fit where, was something that I just grew up with. And it was always around like cafecitos, and like it didn't matter what time of day it was, I was drinking a cup of coffee. So it's like from a young age, we don't need to talk about my caffeine dependence in this interview, but the point is here that there were a lot of lessons shared at that table. And the hardest conversations, if there was health issues or a loss, or hey, we're going to move, or we need to move again, just all those things happen. And I knew from my familia, like my own cousins, my friends, people that I like got to know on a deeper level as family, they they had similar moments. It was like always something that would happen in the kitchen. And for a lot of people, it was tea. A lot of people, it was cafe. But just this space where you would connect, center yourself, and share what is happening, what's the buzz. And so I sat on this idea of coffee and chisme for a while because I was still trying to accept myself as a creative in the way that I would be like, oh, like, what does a writer look like? Or what is like, who am I to think that I could share XYZ? And it's like, no, actually, like, why do you think you can't? Like, why not? So after I graduated from UC Santa Cruz in 2018, I felt really isolated. I was working a temp job as a clerk at the court, which really just meant I was staring at a screen for 8 hours a day, processing online invoices and documents. I was going crazy. So I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts. And I just started listening to all these other creatives that were doing what they wanted to do. And that inspired me to just do the thing. And one of my best friends, Kevin, at the time, we were both temp workers at this job. And he's a musician and creative, and was teaching himself on his lunch break, like, how do you produce? How do you do vocal records? Like, and so we both were like, kind of like spinning off each other and being like, hey, like, we should do the thing. Let's, like, we're standing in our own way. And so often I feel like either in creative spaces, organizing spaces too, like community members sometimes think, oh, well, that's not going to change. That's how it is. Like, that's just how it is. And that's, we don't always fight for communities that we want, or that we deserve. We just fight for things that we think we can achieve, which if we kind of stop standing in our own way, I really feel like there's a lot of power in that. I'm not saying it's a solution, because there's a lot of levels of power, but it is one step.
Right.
That's why Coffee became an actual digital space. And yeah, I also have a podcast, but I have not followed up after my episode yet. So I'll have to invite you on.
Whenever you want to throw me an invitation, I'm happy to come on in. And there's something about the permission to be imperfect, and the permission to dare to envision and strategize and work toward and creatively tinker with things that aren't certain, right?
Yeah.
To produce change. And there's a difference there. And I love creatives because we're such creative enablers. And, I know I'm notorious for being like, yes, yes,
do the thing.
Yeah. And people are like, well, yeah. And I'm like, you already know, if you call me, I'm not going to be like, no, you really should not try to do a podcast. You really need it. I'm not that person. Right. And there is some magic, and it's kind of this affirming ripple effect of sorts, because the reason I'm so emboldened to just be like, yeah, I'm going to tinker with this, right, without having to have it perfect, without having the space to siphon off the noise from the gardening people next door, that I'm like, is right now the time to mow your lawn? Like, it's hellishly hot out there. Maybe you should wait for the sun to go down. Doesn't matter, right? Because we're going to still share, and we're still going to do. And it's kind of like that element of coffee and chisme in the kitchen cafecito. You didn't have to have the best Nespresso machine. You didn't have to have the best coffee. It could have been Folgers for all anybody ever cared about. It was what happened as a result of that gathering and that tinkering and that, daring to drink bad coffee together sometimes,
Yes.
And that, for me, I'm constantly thinking of how my grandma would do that in the morning with her friends. And I don't ever know exactly what they were talking about or strategizing toward, but I knew that there were several people in the kitchen with some chatter, and it smelled like Folgers up in there, and sometimes there was paint peeling off the wall, and it was okay. And there's something about that just continues to inspire, right? Different layers of permission.
Yeah.
And I feel like, again, it brings me back to the poems. Poems feel like that in a big way. And I don't know if you have a third one for us, but I know we're getting close to time, and I don't like to keep people in perpetuity for as much as I would love to be like, let me keep you here forever and just.
Let's see. I will share. Okay, so this is one of the first pieces I shared on my site. And it was one of the first pieces I wrote that I looked at and I said, this will resonate with somebody else. This is an experience that I haven't read written about, and I think it needs to be shared. So this one is called Third Space, and it's about that feeling that you create with you and someone else, the things that are unsaid in person, the things that are unheard out loud, and that kind of feeling of intimacy and vulnerability. So there's a certain intimacy about a shared space with a person. There's the space that you share when you're side by side. There's the space that you share when you're far away and distant. But there's also this third space that you create when you're away from them. The texts, the calls, the FaceTime conversations, the memes tagged, the photos shared. This third space is shared between you two, up in the cloud, traveling through binary combinations to get from one person to another. And in this third space, we are bolder. We are more vulnerable. We are multi-layered. We know how to share deeper thoughts that we couldn't otherwise verbalize through links, videos, quotes. But we are also detached. This third space can leave us forgetting the person behind the screen, behind the keyboard. This third space can be so utilized that it starts to make your connection feel third person, detaching you from the first person experience. This intimacy in this third space is suspended digitally, always there, always coded, always present. And even after we remove each other from our lives, and even if and when we choose to delete our photos and messages, our third space will remain. Digital footprints, carbon copied from the footprints we left on one another's hearts. That digital trail of blue text bubbles, colorful square icons marked with red numbers to tell us that there's something, someone waiting. But one day, we won't be waiting for the other on the opposite side of the screen. One day, we'll stop sharing space, and our we will become two me's, and our spaces with one another will collapse. But that third space will be there. Long after you, long after me, long after us.
That third space.
Yes.
And right, has so many different layers of meaning and what we can attach to it past this moment. And that piece reminds me of where you were a few minutes back in the conversation with, being okay with not being okay. And that third space is the site of so many things. And I think a lot of us are going to be kind of lingering in that third space, because when we reopen, in air quotes here, the assumption is we'll go back to broken, right? Because normal was never really a thing, but we'll go back to broken, how we accepted brokenness in our everyday pre-pandemic. And I think a lot of us are going to come out into the world shifted. And so I think that the work of poets is to anchor ourselves in being and permission and being okay with what is the imprint of that third space when the me and the me is no longer there, because a lot of our folks aren't there in their me space anymore, right? A lot of us have experienced so much loss, and I don't know that we're ready to go back and fully accept, and fully come into that space of never quite feels fully finished or closed, but there's that third space. And so again, I am so thankful that you've come into your own in this way, and that you're offering it up for folks to connect and, take a second to just be, whether it be with our poems, your poems. Take some time and play with your own poetry of sorts because you don't have to be perfect. And we all have words. And the great thing about poetry is that it is, for as much as it's forceful in terms of getting us into the seat and writing, it's very much forgiving in terms of you don't have to have the perfect words. You know, we've seen poems that are just one word throughout and somehow it works.
Yeah.
And it's for who it's for, and who it's for will find it and come across it, right? But you gotta first write it and dare to be about it. And super grateful that you're daring. And sometimes you're like, I'm not daring anything. I'm just here. And that should be enough for folks. I'm just here. And there's something beautiful about that. And being that example, you know, just by showing up at your best any given day. And that's always going to look different.
Definitely. I think there's something beautiful in everybody taking a moment just to ask yourself, like, what words are sitting in my heart? Like, what is sitting with me right now? And it doesn't need to rhyme. It doesn't need to look a certain way. It's just what is sitting inside me right now.
Yeah.
And that's really all it is.
It doesn't even have to be appropriate, right? We're used to poems with a bunch of 4-letter words in them. And
oh my gosh, no. You can throw in all the swear words you want. Be like, I feel like absolutely today. And you just go off.
Yeah, some of my most beautiful poetry has just all those words in there.
Yeah.
And some of the most catchy poetry in the world is, you know, kind of referred to rap and hip hop, and it's out there with some beats. So
yes,
just do the
exactly.
same. But it feels like such an alivio to just, it's off my chest and it's out of my headspace and it's out.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to convert everybody into becoming poets, but, you know, definitely.
Let's start our own poetry cult.
Definitely can't hurt to make some space to at least exist poetically, right?
Yeah. And I'm so glad that we got to share this awesome space together too, because they're such great conversations, and like even with your title that really just flow and thinking about the world and how we are flowing through it. There's something special about that.
Well, we got you to the 3 poems and we had some good conversation. And I'm looking forward to peeping a little bit more of Coffee and Cheese Mess and listening to the podcast when you're ready to share that with us too. And if folks want to check that out, we find you at Coffee and Cheese Mess.
Coffeeandcheesemess.com. Yeah.
Okay. By none other than Mia X, Mia Xochitl Hernández.
Yeah.
Mia X is just so like Mia X. It's like
I know.
Implication right there. You're like, I just showed up with my name. That's it.
That's just who I am. I just showed up.
Well, thank you for playing along today. I look forward to seeing how the rest of the journey unfolds and how you continue to disrupt a whole lot of stuff in a really good way. And for folks watching along, gracias. It's been a poetic little journey, not without its own little bits of tech sweat going on here. But it looks like we'll be on again with a different poet next week on Monday. The time changes, the day's been staying the same, and we'll see how long that rolls out because I'm just trusting it to be effortless.
There you go. Thank you so much.
Folks. Thanks, Mia.